How dare you? You filthy poor maid. If you've ever witnessed someone humiliate another human being just because they think money means superiority, then you already know what comes next. Karma dressed in elegance. Because that night, inside one of the richest homes in New York, a single act of cruelty would bring an empire to its knees. Before we go any further, hit subscribe and stay with me till the end. Because what happened that night will remind you that the higher some people climb, the harder they fall. The Kingsley estate glowed like a golden cathedral in the hills outside Manhattan. The long driveway shimmered with rows of parked luxury cars, their polished metal catching the glow of chandeliers spilling light through the mansion's towering windows. Inside, the sound of a string quartet floated over laughter, clinking glasses, and whispered gossip. This was the Kingsley Foundation Gala, an event the media called the Charity of the Year. In reality, it was a competition for the rich to measure who sparkled the brightest. Every dress, every diamond, every smile had a purpose. At the top of the marble staircase stood Evelyn Kingsley, the woman of the hour. Her gown, gold and glass beaded, shimmered as she accepted air kisses and compliments she didn't believe. Her beauty was the kind that turned heads, but her heart was cold as the champagne in her glass. Beside her was her husband, Richard Kingsley, the real reason everyone was there. A billionaire developer whose name was etched into skylines from Chicago to Dubai. Tall, silver-haired, and charming in an effortless way, Richard carried the weight of old money, but lately, he'd begun to wonder if all that gold had rusted his soul. He smiled through conversations about mergers and stocks, but his mind drifted elsewhere. Lately, everything felt hollow. The charity galas, the politics, the dinners, they all blurred into one endless performance. Evelyn lived for it. Richard only endured it. And tonight, the curtain would finally start to fall. In the kitchen, away from the chandeliers and the chatter, Lena Carter adjusted her crisp white uniform in front of a small mirror. She smoothed a loose curl from her forehead and tied her apron tighter. The uniform didn't fit quite right. It was borrowed from the catering company, but she didn't care. She wasn't here to fit in. She was here to finish paying for her degree. Lena was 23, an architecture graduate student from Detroit with big dreams and an even bigger student loan. Her mother had cleaned houses her whole life, and Lena had promised that someday she'd design one they could truly call their own. She had spent the last 3 years studying how buildings could heal broken communities, how light, air, and space could make people feel human again. But tonight, no one here knew that. To them, she was just another server, invisible against the marble and gold. Still, she walked through those grand halls with quiet confidence. She carried each tray as though balancing her future on it, steady, graceful, unshaken. Richard noticed her first. While pretending to laugh at another donor's joke, his eyes had wandered toward the serving staff. And there she was, a young woman who moved differently from the others. Composed. Her face showed neither the nervousness of the new nor the exhaustion of the seasoned. He watched as she gracefully avoided a guest's careless swing of a champagne flute, caught it mid-fall, and set it back upright without missing a step. No flinch, no panic, just composure. He didn't know her name yet, but something about her presence cut through the noise. Evelyn noticed too, but not with admiration, with irritation. "Richard," she whispered sharply, noticing his gaze. "Are you seriously watching The Help now?" He blinked, caught off guard. "I was just thinking, she handles herself well." Evelyn's lips curved in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Darling, that's their job. To be handled." Her words landed like a quiet slap. Richard said nothing, but his silence was heavy. As the night deepened, the ballroom glittered brighter. Guests toasted to causes they would forget by morning. Evelyn floated among them like royalty, her laugh echoing under the chandeliers. Lena passed through the crowd, offering glasses with practiced politeness. She kept her eyes low, but she saw everything, the way people looked through her, not at her. The way they spoke as if the walls couldn't hear. She stopped briefly near the stage to adjust a tray, when a familiar voice pierced the air. "Tell me, dear," Evelyn said, loud enough for her friends to hear. "Do they train you girls to stand so still, or are you just terrified of moving?" The laughter that followed was light and poisonous. Lena turned, face calm. Her voice steady. "Yes, ma'am," she said quietly. Stillness keeps the structure balanced. The reply was soft but carried weight. Evelyn blinked, thrown off. The guests chuckled uncertainly, unsure whether the young woman had just insulted her. Evelyn forced a smile, but her jaw tightened. "How clever," she said sweetly, the edge in her tone sharpening. "I suppose you think you're quite something, don't you?" Lena only nodded slightly and stepped away. But the damage was done. Evelyn's pride had been pricked, and she wasn't the kind of woman who let that pass. Across the room, Richard's eyes followed Lena as she moved quietly toward the bar. Her dignity stood out against all the noise and glitter, like calm water in a storm. He leaned slightly toward his business partner and muttered, "Sometimes I think grace has more power than wealth." His friend laughed it off, but Richard wasn't joking. Back near the grand staircase, Evelyn was fuming beneath her smile. Her friends whispered in her ear, feeding the fire. "Did you hear her tone?" one said. "Arrogant for a maid," another replied. Evelyn sipped her champagne, eyes locked on Lena across the room. "I'll make sure she remembers her place before this night is over," she murmured. The orchestra began a new piece, violins sweeping through the air. The guests clinked glasses and resumed their shallow chatter. But under the polished surface, tension had begun to hum, subtle, electric, and dangerous. Lena felt it too, though she couldn't yet name it. She only knew that something about the woman in gold felt like a storm waiting to strike. Still, she kept her composure, setting another tray down with quiet precision. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. "Dignity is the only thing they can't take from you unless you give it away." If you've ever witnessed someone humiliate another human being just because they think money means superiority, then you already know what comes next. Karma dressed in elegance. Because that night, inside one of the richest homes in New York, a single act of cruelty would bring an empire to its knees. Before we go any further, hit subscribe and stay with me till the end. Because what happened that night will remind you that the higher some people climb, the harder they fall. The Kingsley estate glowed like a golden cathedral in the hills outside Manhattan. The long driveway shimmered with rows of parked luxury cars, their polished metal catching the glow of chandeliers spilling light through the mansion's towering windows. Inside, the sound of a string quartet floated over laughter, clinking glasses, and whispered gossip. This was the Kingsley Foundation Gala, an event the media called the Charity of the Year. In reality, it was a competition for the rich to measure who sparkled the brightest. Every dress, every diamond, every smile had a purpose. At the top of the marble staircase stood Evelyn Kingsley, the woman of the hour. Her gown, gold and glass beaded, shimmered as she accepted air kisses and compliments she didn't believe. Her beauty was the kind that turned heads, but her heart was cold as the champagne in her glass. Beside her was her husband, Richard Kingsley, the real reason everyone was there. A billionaire developer whose name was etched into skylines from Chicago to Dubai. Tall, silver-haired, and charming in an effortless way, Richard carried the weight of old money. But lately, he'd begun to wonder if all that gold had rusted his soul. He smiled through conversations about mergers and stocks, but his mind drifted elsewhere. Lately, everything felt hollow. The charity galas, the politics, the dinners, they all blurred into one endless performance. Evelyn lived for it. Richard only endured it. And tonight, the curtain would finally start to fall. In the kitchen, away from the chandeliers and the chatter, Lena Carter adjusted her crisp white uniform in front of a small mirror. She smoothed a loose curl from her forehead and tied her apron tighter. The uniform didn't fit quite right. It was borrowed from the catering company, but she didn't care. She wasn't here to fit in. She was here to finish paying for her degree. Lena was 23, an architecture graduate student from Detroit with big dreams and an even bigger student loan. Her mother had cleaned houses her whole life, and Lena had promised that someday she'd design one they could truly call their own. She had spent the last 3 years studying how buildings could heal broken communities, how light, air, and space could make people feel human again. But tonight, no one here knew that. To them, she was just another server, invisible against the marble and gold. Still, she walked through those grand halls with quiet confidence. She carried each tray as though balancing her future on it, steady, graceful, unshaken. Richard noticed her first. While pretending to laugh at another donor's joke, his eyes had wandered toward the serving staff. And there she was, a young woman who moved differently from the others. Composed. Her face showed neither the nervousness of the new nor the exhaustion of the seasoned. He watched as she gracefully avoided a guest's careless swing of a champagne flute, caught it mid-fall, and set it back upright without missing a step. No flinch. No panic. Just composure. He didn't know her name yet, but something about her presence cut through the noise. Evelyn noticed too, but not with admiration. With irritation. "Richard," she whispered sharply, noticing his gaze. "Are you seriously watching the help now?" He blinked, caught off guard. "I was just thinking, she handles herself well." Evelyn's lips curved in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Darling, that's their job. To be handled." Her words landed like a quiet slap. Richard said nothing, but his silence was heavy. As the night deepened, the ballroom glittered brighter. Guests toasted to causes they would forget by morning. Evelyn floated among them like royalty, her laugh echoing under the chandeliers. Lena passed through the crowd, offering glasses with practiced politeness. She kept her eyes low, but she saw everything, the way people looked through her, not at her. The way they spoke as if the walls couldn't hear. She stopped briefly near the stage to adjust a tray, when a familiar voice pierced the air. "Tell me, dear," Evelyn said, loud enough for her friends to hear. "Do they train you girls to stand so still, or are you just terrified of moving?" The laughter that followed was light and poisonous. Lena turned, face calm, her voice steady. "Yes, ma'am," she said quietly. "Stillness keeps the structure balanced." The reply was soft but carried weight. Evelyn blinked, thrown off. The guests chuckled uncertainly, unsure whether the young woman had just insulted her. Evelyn forced a smile, but her jaw tightened. "How clever," she said sweetly, the edge in her tone sharpening. "I suppose you think you're quite something, don't you?" Lena only nodded slightly and stepped away. But the damage was done. Evelyn's pride had been pricked, and she wasn't the kind of woman who let that pass. Across the room, Richard's eyes followed Lena as she moved quietly toward the bar. Her dignity stood out against all the noise and glitter, like calm water in a storm. He leaned slightly toward his business partner and muttered, "Sometimes I think grace has more power than wealth." His friend laughed it off, but Richard wasn't joking. Back near the grand staircase, Evelyn was fuming beneath her smile. Her friends whispered in her ear, feeding the fire. "Did you hear her tone?" one said. "Arrogant for a maid," another replied. Evelyn sipped her champagne, eyes locked on Lena across the room. "I'll make sure she remembers her place before this night is over," she murmured. The orchestra began a new piece, violins sweeping through the air. The guests clinked glasses and resumed their shallow chatter. But under the polished surface, tension had begun to hum, subtle, electric, and dangerous. Lena felt it too, though she couldn't yet name it. She only knew that something about the woman in gold felt like a storm waiting to strike. Still, she kept her composure, setting another tray down with quiet precision. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. "Dignity is the only thing they can't take from you unless you give it away. You can go." Lena nodded and walked away once again. And once again, her steps were steady, calm, proud. Richard watched her disappear into the hallway. A guest whispered, "That girl handled that better than I would have." Another replied, "She has more dignity than half this room." Evelyn pretended not to hear. But her face had changed. Beneath the perfect makeup, insecurity flickered. She had won the moment, but she had lost something bigger. Everyone felt it, even if they didn't say it. And Lena, she hadn't lost anything. Not really. They had torn her uniform, not her spirit. They had tried to break her pride, but pride wasn't something they gave her, so they couldn't take it away. She paused in the quiet hallway outside the ballroom, hand pressing over the torn fabric. Her heart beat fast, not from shame, but from something stronger. Resolve. This night isn't over, she thought. And in the ballroom behind her, the stain on silk dried darker, a reminder that even the richest fabric can't hide cruelty. Tonight was just the beginning. The hallway outside the ballroom was quiet, the noise of the party fading into a soft hum. Lena pressed her palm to the torn edge of her uniform and took a slow breath. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. She just stood still long enough to feel her heartbeat calm down. Then, as she had done 1,000 times before, she pulled herself back together. Her mind drifted to Detroit. Not the Detroit people talked about on the news. Her Detroit. The one with corner stores that knew her name. The one with porches where neighbors waved at each other even when money was tight. The one where her mother left every morning with a bucket and gloves because someone else's kitchen needed to shine. Lena saw herself at 9 years old, sitting at their kitchen table with brown grocery bag paper spread flat under her elbows. She'd slice the bags open and tape them together with careful seams, building a big blank canvas. Then she'd draw houses. Strong lines. Wide windows. Bright front doors. She drew sunlight into rooms that had never seen it. Her mother would come home late, skin smelling like bleach and lemon. She'd stand behind Lena and rest a hand on her shoulder. "That one has a porch," her mother would say softly. "Good. People need a place to sit and breathe." Lena had nodded. "And a ramp," she'd add, penciling the simple slope to the door. "And a window by the kitchen sink so the person washing dishes can still see the street." Her mother would smile, tired and proud. "You think of things that matter." That's how it started. Not with fancy blueprints. With the belief that buildings should be kind. That a floor plan could tell a person, "You belong here." That design could protect dignity instead of trapping it. Years later, at Columbia, a professor had said something that stuck in her ribs like a truth you can lean on. The way we build spaces reflects the way we see people. If a room has no light, someone decided that light wasn't important for whoever lives there. If there's no ramp, someone decided access wasn't worth the cost. If a lobby is marble and a staff door is narrow, someone decided beauty is for guests and smallness is for workers. Lena looked down at her torn uniform. Marble under her shoes. A narrow corridor behind her. The truth was not subtle in this house. She reached into her apron pocket and touched the small recorder hidden inside, tucked in a cloth sleeve she'd sewn herself. It wasn't a secret because she wanted revenge. It wasn't a trap. It was a record. For her thesis. For her evidence. For the kind of truth that doesn't vanish when money tells it to be quiet. Her project had a long title, Architectural Hierarchy and Human Behavior in Elite Environments, but the idea was simple. Watch how people act when a space tells them who matters. Do they speak kinder in rooms with low ceilings? Do they become crueler when they're wrapped in gold? Do they ignore people who enter through a side door? She had permission from the catering company to conduct social observations while she worked. No names. No faces. Just patterns. Words. Choices. The recorder was there to catch context, tone, distance, volume, because memory can be doubted, but recordings hold their own ground. She had logged hours of soft laughter, small kindnesses, and casual slights. Tonight, the tape would hold something more. She slipped into the servants' quarters. It was a plain room tucked behind the kitchen. A few chairs, a metal rack of coats, a sink that dripped. 2 other servers stood there, lowering their voices when they saw Lena. "Hey," one whispered, eyes wide with sympathy. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Lena said, even if the word felt heavier than usual. The older woman shook her head. "You did nothing wrong. Everyone saw the waiter bump that table." "Doesn't matter," the other muttered. "She's the hostess. People will take her side." "They can ruin you," the older one added softly. "These people. They make a phone call, and suddenly you lose every shift for a month." Lena folded her arms and leaned against the wall. "I know. Just keep your head down," the younger one said. "Finish the night. Don't give them more to twist." Lena nodded. She understood fear. She respected caution. But there was a line between silence and surrender, and she couldn't step over it. Not anymore. Not after that dress, that tear, that laugh. She checked the recorder, still on, still clear, then slid it back into its pocket. She rinsed a cloth at the sink and pressed it over the stain on her uniform, but the fabric stayed marked. Fine. Let it stay. Marks tell stories. She straightened. Thanks, she said gently. I'll be careful. Please do, the older woman whispered. You're smart. Don't let them take your future over this. Lena gave a small smile. They can't take what they didn't give. She left the small room and walked back through the narrow corridor toward the ballroom. The sound returned first. Strings, laughter, the soft clink of glass. Then the light. Then the faces. She lifted her chin by an inch. Not defiant. Just present. A fixed smile. Quiet strength. She passed a mirror and made sure her eyes looked calm. She adjusted her tray and entered the room like it was any other room. Like she belonged. Because she did. Guests glanced at her and then away again. A few looked longer, their expressions complicated. Shame, curiosity, something like respect. It didn't matter. She had a job to do. She offered champagne to a couple near the staircase. She took empty glasses from a table where no one said thank you. She moved through the room with the same careful steps as before. Across the ballroom, Richard Kingsley saw her return. He had been pretending to listen to a board member talk about a new partnership. He had been nodding at the right moments. He had even smiled once. But he had not stopped thinking about the girl in the white uniform who didn't break when his wife tried to break her. When their eyes met, it was brief. Not a stare. Not a plea. Just an acknowledgement. Two people who had seen the same moment from different sides and understood what it meant. It wasn't beauty that held Richard's attention. It was composure. The kind that doesn't come from lessons or money. The kind that is built by long days, steady work, and a mother's quiet faith. He felt a tug in his chest he hadn't felt in years. The urge to do something that was simply right. Evelyn floated past him with fresh charm and tight smiles, as if she could stitch the night back together with small talk. But the night had already changed shape, whether she admitted it or not. At the edge of the dance floor, Lena paused near a marble column and took in the room like an architect would. Ceiling height, traffic flow, the way the musicians were slightly too far from the center to feel included. She noticed where the staff door forced servers to cross the floor in full view, absorbing accidental bumps and intentional cuts. She noticed how the light pooled around certain people and left others shadowed. She noticed where power stood and where it sat. She didn't feel small. She felt observant. She felt ready. A donor waved her over, asked for sparkling water with lemon, then forgot to say thank you. Another asked if she knew where the powder room was. A third asked if she had learned her lesson. Lena answered each one with a polite nod, a steady voice, and the quiet knowledge that she was recording every word. Not to destroy anyone. To capture truth. To show how rooms can teach people to act like marble matters more than a human being. On her next pass, she crossed near Richard again. He stepped slightly aside so she could pass without brushing his sleeve. A small courtesy. A small signal. Thank you, Lena said, almost too softly to hear. Richard gave a single nod. His face didn't smile, but his eyes did. It was the kind of exchange that meant nothing to a room and everything to the two people inside it. The music swelled. The lights glowed warmer. The party carried on as if nothing had happened. But the house knew. Houses always know. They hold footsteps and echoes. They keep the weight of what people do inside them. Lena adjusted her grip on the tray and whispered under her breath, barely moving her lips, a promise and a prayer wrapped into one simple sentence. Let the walls remember who built them. The night carried on, but something inside the grand Kingsley mansion had changed. The laughter felt thinner, the music louder, as if trying to drown out what had already been seen. And at the center of it all, Evelyn was still seething. She had lost control once tonight, and she could feel the sting of it on her skin. The gown was clean now, the red stain mostly gone, but the humiliation lingered like perfume that refused to fade. She needed to reclaim her power, and she knew exactly how. She gathered her circle, 3 women in glittering gowns and diamonds so large they looked like secrets carved from ice. They were her usual companions in gossip and judgment, and tonight she needed them to laugh with her, to remind her that she still ruled this room. You should have seen her face, Evelyn said with a laugh too sharp to be real. That maid looked like she'd seen a ghost when I tore her uniform. It's almost cute, really. These people always think calmness will save them. One of the women giggled nervously. Another took a sip of champagne, eyes flicking toward the crowd. The third said softly, Evelyn, dear, maybe it's best to let it go now. Everyone saw what happened. Evelyn's smile tightened. And everyone will also see that I'm not afraid to correct my staff when they're out of line. That's what leadership looks like. Their laughter returned, but it was brittle. The spell she was trying to cast wasn't working like before. Too many eyes had seen too much. Across the room, Lena heard the laughter again. It floated through the clinking of glasses, through the fake compliments and small talk. She didn't need to hear every word to know what it was about. She just kept moving, refilling glasses, collecting plates, and pretending her heart wasn't pounding. She reminded herself why she was here. Her work wasn't over. She had the recorder still running, tucked in her apron pocket, capturing not just voices but the tone of a world built on entitlement. When she passed by a group of guests, she caught pieces of conversation. Is that the one? Someone whispered. Yes. The one from earlier. She's still working? She should have left. Lena didn't look up. She smiled faintly and kept serving. She knew that silence, when held with purpose, could be louder than any outburst. But something shifted. The more Evelyn talked, the more uneasy the room became. People had come to enjoy a night of luxury, not a public humiliation. Her cruelty was no longer entertaining. It was exhausting. When Evelyn mimicked Lena's quiet voice to her friends, the laughter barely landed. It was forced. One of the women even turned away. That's when Richard stepped forward. He'd been patient long enough. His jaw had stayed locked for over an hour, but watching Evelyn continue to degrade someone who'd done nothing wrong, it broke something in him. The man who once avoided conflict for the sake of appearances had finally reached the edge of his silence. He set his glass down, the sound sharp against the marble. The nearest guests turned, surprised by the movement. He walked toward Evelyn's group slowly, every step deliberate, his face calm but his eyes alive with something new. Evelyn, he said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. That's enough. His tone wasn't angry. It was final. She blinked, startled. Excuse me. You heard me, Richard said. Enough. Do you even realize who the woman you just humiliated is? The room fell silent again. People turned, pretending not to stare but staring anyway. Evelyn's laughter faltered. She's a maid, Richard, she said, forcing a smile. Why are you making a scene? Richard took another step forward. She's not just a maid, he said quietly but clearly. She's a graduate student at Columbia. She's studying architecture and sustainable design. Gasps rippled through the room. The words hung heavy, undeniable. Evelyn's smile broke into disbelief. What? She stammered. That's absurd. Lena froze, the tray still in her hands. Her secret was no longer hers. She hadn't wanted anyone to know. It was safer that way. But the truth had slipped out like light through a crack. Richard continued, his voice steady. While you were mocking her, she was showing more grace than anyone here. You tore her uniform to make a point, Evelyn. But all you did was reveal your own ignorance. The crowd whispered. Heads turned. Some guests stepped back, choosing neutrality over loyalty. Lena took a quiet breath and set her tray down on a nearby table. For the first time that night, she spoke not as a maid, but as herself. It's true, she said softly. I'm studying architecture. I design buildings that make people feel safe. She looked directly at Evelyn. Ironically, I've never felt less safe than in one tonight. The sentence landed like a stone dropped in still water. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Even the orchestra paused mid-note. Evelyn's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for support that wasn't there. Richard looked at Lena, his expression firm but kind. You have more dignity than anyone in this room, he said. And I'm sorry my wife forgot what that looks like. The guests murmured in agreement. Someone clapped once, then stopped, unsure. But the energy had changed. Evelyn could feel it, the fragile web of status she'd woven for years beginning to unravel. One of her friends touched her arm. "Evelyn, maybe we should." "No," Evelyn snapped, pulling away. "This is ridiculous. She's playing a role, clearly. Some sob story to make me look bad." Lena didn't respond. She didn't have to. The contrast between Evelyn's sharpness and her calm was enough to prove who had the upper hand now. Richard turned to the guests. "I think we've all had enough entertainment for one night," he said. "Let's focus on the charity we're actually here for." People nodded quickly, eager to shift the mood. The musicians started playing again, soft and low, trying to patch the moment together with melody. Evelyn stood frozen, her face a mask cracking at the edges. For once, she had no words to fill the silence. Richard looked at Lena again. "Miss Carter," he said gently, "I'd like to speak with you after the event. About your work. I think we might have something important to discuss." Lena hesitated, unsure whether to nod or disappear. "Yes, sir," she said finally. "I'd appreciate that." Evelyn turned toward him sharply. "Richard, you can't be serious." But he didn't answer her. His eyes stayed on Lena for a moment longer. Then he walked away, calm and composed, leaving his wife standing in the center of a ballroom that suddenly felt colder than ever. Lena picked up her tray again and returned to her duties, silent but sure. Around her, whispers swirled, sympathy blooming where judgment had been. Evelyn stood alone, her smile gone, her face pale under the golden lights. The woman who had owned every room she entered now found herself in one that no longer belonged to her. And from across the hall, Lena glanced back once, not in triumph, but in quiet certainty. Let the walls remember, she thought, who built them and who tried to tear them down. The music rose again, but this time, the night didn't dance to Evelyn's rhythm. The gala had ended, but the mansion still glowed with its usual show of wealth. Crystal lights, tall mirrors, and the faint scent of champagne and roses. Most of the guests had gone, leaving behind laughter that now sounded like ghosts in the empty hall. The marble floors gleamed, but the air was heavy with what couldn't be polished away: humiliation, truth, and the weight of what came next. Lena had finished her shift quietly. She'd helped the catering team pack up, wiped the last table, and folded her torn uniform neatly into her bag. Now she stood in the doorway of the guest lounge, a room that smelled of leather and cedar, filled with the low hum of a fireplace that didn't need to be lit. Richard Kingsley was already there, sitting on the edge of a velvet armchair, his tie loosened, his expression tired. He looked up as she entered. "Miss Carter," he said, rising to his feet. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit." Lena hesitated. The man who just defended her in front of dozens of powerful people was now standing before her as if he owed her something. That alone unsettled her. "I didn't want to leave without saying, thank you," she said softly. Richard shook his head. "No, Lena. I should be thanking you. You showed more integrity in one evening than most of the people I've known my entire life." She smiled faintly. "Integrity doesn't pay tuition, Mr. Kingsley. But thank you." He studied her for a moment, his eyes thoughtful. "I'm sorry," he said finally, "for what happened tonight. For what my wife did. And, if I'm being honest, for the kind of system I've helped build. The one that allows her to think she can do what she did and walk away untouched." Lena looked down at her hands, folded neatly in her lap. "You didn't spill the wine," she said. "And you didn't tear my uniform." "No," he admitted. "But I stood in rooms like that for years and pretended not to see. That's not innocence. That's comfort." For a moment, silence filled the space. The fire crackled softly in the hearth. Lena glanced at the faint reflection of her face in the window, half-shadowed, half-lit. "There's something you should know," she said at last. Richard turned toward her. "What is it?" She reached into her apron and pulled out her small black recorder, its light still glowing faintly. "I recorded the entire evening. Every word. Every laugh. Every time she called me something less than human." Richard's eyebrows lifted, not in shock, but in quiet understanding. "I'm not surprised," he said. "You're sharper than anyone gives you credit for." "I wasn't planning to use it," Lena continued quickly. "It's for my thesis. I'm studying how architecture influences behavior, how the design of a space changes how people treat each other. I record everything I observe so I can analyze tone and power dynamics later. But," she paused, the words sticking for a moment, "after what happened tonight, I don't know what to do with it." Richard stepped closer. "You mean whether to keep it private, or to expose her?" Lena nodded. "If I release it, it won't just destroy her. Could destroy you too. And maybe my job, my career. People like your wife have connections everywhere. They could bury me before I even graduate." Richard was quiet for a long time. He looked into the fire, as if the flames could burn away the question. Finally, he said, "You're right. If this recording goes public, it will cause a storm. My company will be dragged into it. The headlines will be brutal." He looked at her again. "But the world deserves to see who people truly are, especially when they hide behind gold walls and charity dinners." Lena studied him carefully. She could hear the sincerity in his tone, but also the exhaustion. He wasn't just angry at Evelyn. He was angry at himself. "You really mean that?" she asked quietly. "I do," he said. "If my wife's reputation is the price of truth, then it's long overdue." Lena looked down at the recorder again, her thumb tracing the small metal button. "I don't want revenge," she said. "I just want honesty to mean something." "It already does," Richard said. "You've shown that." At that moment, a soft click echoed from the doorway. Evelyn stood there, her gold gown shimmering under the light. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with sharp suspicion. "Am I interrupting something?" she asked, her voice sweet and dangerous. Richard turned, unflinching. "We were talking." "I can see that," Evelyn replied. Her gaze moved from her husband to Lena, then down to the small recorder in her hand. "What's that?" Lena slipped it behind her back instinctively. "Nothing, ma'am. Just part of my research." "Research," Evelyn repeated, her smile tightening. "So this is what you do. You come into my home, humiliate me in front of my guests, and now you're recording private conversations? How clever." Richard stepped between them. "Evelyn, stop." "No, you stop," she snapped. "Do you have any idea how this looks? Talking to her alone like this? Defending her like she's human?" Richard interrupted, his tone sharper than before. "Yes, Evelyn. That's exactly what I'm doing." Her face twisted with disbelief. "You're defending her over your own wife?" "I'm defending what's right," he said simply. Evelyn laughed bitterly. "Don't play hero, Richard. You think this girl cares about right and wrong? She's playing you. Look at her. She knows exactly what she's doing." Lena stood silent, her eyes calm but unyielding. Evelyn's words were meant to wound, but they no longer reached her. "Mrs. Kingsley," she said softly, "I'm not playing anyone. I didn't ask to be humiliated tonight. I didn't ask for this conversation. And I don't want anything from you or your husband." Evelyn stepped closer. "You want attention. You want sympathy." Lena shook her head. "I want dignity." The words landed harder than any insult could. For the first time, Evelyn hesitated. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Richard turned to his wife. "You should leave," he said, "before you make this worse." Evelyn's eyes darted between them, her confidence cracking. "If that recording sees daylight, you'll regret it," she said, her voice trembling now. "I'll ruin you both." "Maybe," Richard said calmly. "But maybe the world is tired of watching you ruin everyone else." For a moment, the three of them stood in silence. The billionaire, the socialite, and the maid turned witness, each aware that the balance of power in that room had shifted forever. Evelyn turned on her heel and stormed out, her heels clicking like a warning down the marble corridor. Lena exhaled, feeling the tension leave her chest. Richard rubbed his temples. I'm sorry you had to deal with that again. She's scared, Lena said softly. People get cruel when they're scared. He nodded slowly. Yes. And this time, she's scared of the truth. Lena glanced at the small recorder again, its red light still blinking. Maybe the truth needs to speak for itself. Richard looked at her, a quiet respect in his eyes. Whatever you decide to do, Miss Carter, I'll stand by it. She smiled faintly, but didn't answer. A few minutes later, Lena stepped outside into the cold night. The air was crisp, the mansion behind her glowing faintly against the dark sky. She pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders and reached into her pocket. The recorder's light glowed softly in her hand. Small, steady, unshakable. Inside it was everything that had happened that night. The insults, the laughter, the tear of fabric, and the truth no one could twist anymore. It wasn't a weapon she wanted to use. But if the world demanded proof, she had it. Lena looked up at the vast Kingsley mansion, its windows like watching eyes. Let's see who really owns the story now, she whispered. Then she walked into the night, her footsteps quiet but certain, carrying with her the record that would change everything. It began with a headline. Billionaire's wife humiliates black student in shocking outburst. At first, it appeared quietly, on a niche blog that covered social issues. Then it spread. Within hours, the recording had made its way to Twitter, Reddit, YouTube, and every corner of the internet where outrage travels fast. The video was short, just over 2 minutes, but it said everything. It showed Evelyn Kingsley in her gold gown, sneering down at Lena Carter, calling her cheap help, tearing her uniform, and laughing as others looked on. It captured Richard's voice too, firm and tired, saying, "Evelyn, that's enough." And then Lena's quiet words at the end, "I design buildings that make people feel safe." Ironically, I've never felt less safe than in one tonight. Those 20 seconds became a rallying cry. The comments poured in. She spoke with more class than anyone in that room. This is what racism looks like behind chandeliers. She tore her dress, but that girl tore down her empire. Within 24 hours, the clip had been viewed over 10 million times. By the next morning, reporters camped outside the Kingsley estate gates, microphones clutched like weapons of truth. Evelyn woke to chaos. Her phone buzzed non-stop, calls from stylists, publicists, and friends who now spoke in frightened tones. "Evelyn, you have to make a statement," one said. "Say it was taken out of context." Out of context. Evelyn barked, pacing the marble floors. "She humiliated me." But even as she said it, she heard how small the excuse sounded. Her assistant quit by text that afternoon. 2 luxury brands canceled endorsement deals. One statement read simply, "Our company stands firmly against discrimination. We will no longer be working with Mrs. Kingsley." The charity board she chaired issued a polite but icy notice. "Given recent events, we believe Mrs. Kingsley's continued presence may distract from our mission." Her social calendar emptied overnight. Invitations vanished. Messages from friends went unanswered, and the same women who once begged for her approval now appeared in interviews condemning her behavior. "She's always been a bit intense," one said delicately on live TV. "None of us condone what happened." Inside the mansion, Evelyn's world cracked. She threw her phone across the room, shattering it against the wall. She shouted at the television, at reporters, at the shadows in her gilded mirrors. "They're vultures," she screamed. "All of them." But her reflection didn't answer. It only stared back, pale and tired. Her husband's voice echoed from the doorway. "You brought this on yourself." She turned sharply. Richard stood there, holding a single folder, the divorce papers. "You're leaving me now," she snapped. "After everything we've built?" He looked around the mansion, at the gold accents, the marble floors, the art pieces she'd chosen because they looked expensive. His voice was calm, almost sorrowful. "We didn't build anything," he said. "We just covered rot with money." Evelyn's eyes widened. "You'd throw it all away for her?" "This isn't about her," Richard said. "It's about the person I've become living next to you." He walked past her and placed the papers on the grand piano, the same one she had once played for guests when she wanted to seem cultured. "I've already made a statement," he said. Evelyn's voice dropped. "What kind of statement?" He met her gaze squarely. "The truth." He left without another word. Later that evening, his statement flooded every news feed in America. Cruelty isn't a luxury anyone can afford. It's time to rebuild what wealth has broken. His calm tone made it hit even harder. Within hours, journalists hailed him as a rare billionaire with a conscience. Talk shows dissected his words. And Evelyn's fall became complete. Meanwhile, in a modest apartment across town, Lena sat by her desk, the same recorder beside her laptop. She hadn't leaked the video, though she could guess who did. Someone from the staff, maybe one of the servers who'd had enough of watching people like her get crushed. Her phone buzzed nonstop too, but for a different reason. Emails flooded her inbox. Professors from other universities, architecture firms offering internships, and even foundations wanting to fund her next project. One message stood out. It came from the dean of Columbia's Graduate School of Architecture. "Lena, your courage has turned a theory into living proof. We'd like to sponsor your research full-time. Congratulations." She read it twice before letting out a shaky laugh. Her mother called that night. "Baby," she said, voice trembling, "I saw you on the news. I didn't like seeing what that woman did to you, but I've never been prouder." Lena smiled, tears finally spilling after days of restraint. "You told me to build things that last, Mom." "And you did," her mother said softly. "You built respect." Days later, reporters gathered at the base of the Kingsley mansion gates again. But this time, no one answered. Evelyn had locked herself inside. Curtains drawn. Mirrors covered. The house, once full of chatter and music, now echoed only with the sound of her own footsteps. She scrolled endlessly through headlines, watching the footage play again and again. Her voice, her smirk, the rip of fabric, each second stabbing deeper. She threw the remote at the screen, shattering it. The reflection in the broken glass stared back, warped and uneven. She barely recognized herself. All around her, the empire she had built on control was crumbling. One by one, her contacts vanished. Lawyers stopped returning her calls. Bankers turned polite but distant. The world that once bowed to her had closed its doors. In a desperate moment, she dialed Richard's number. It went straight to voicemail. She left a message that started as anger and ended in tears. "You think you're noble, but you destroyed me. You destroyed us." She hung up and pressed her palms against her temples. For the first time, the mansion felt enormous. Not luxurious, just empty. Outside, the world moved on. Articles called Lena the symbol of modern dignity. Architecture journals quoted her line about safe spaces. A non-profit invited her to speak about equality in urban design. The same story that ruined one woman's empire built another woman's future. But Lena didn't celebrate. She watched the coverage quietly, aware that the attention would fade, but the lesson wouldn't. She hadn't wanted to ruin anyone. She'd only wanted to show that truth still mattered. Back at the mansion, Evelyn stood alone in the dark. The chandelier's light fractured through the cracked television screen, scattering across the marble floor like pieces of a broken crown. Her reflection appeared again in a shard of glass, distorted, fragmented, unrecognizable. The queen of marble and gold had fallen, and the silence that followed wasn't peace. It was justice. 6 months changed everything. The headlines were long gone, the think pieces filed away, and the internet had found new scandals to rage about. But in the quiet places where real work happens, something steady had begun. Lena Carter now walked into a sunlit office with rolled blueprints under her arm and a badge that read, Director of Urban Renewal Projects, Kingsley Foundation. It wasn't the old Kingsley Foundation. Richard had taken a scalpel to it. The glitter was gone. The staged photo ops were gone. In their place were task lists, audits, community boards, and timelines with real deadlines. He kept only what served people, not egos. The reception wall no longer displayed donor names in gold. Instead, it held a map of the city with red pins marking neighborhoods that had been forgotten. Lena stood before that map every morning. She didn't see red pins. She saw porches and windows. She saw ramps and playgrounds. She saw mothers washing dishes by a sunlit sink, watching their kids ride bikes outside. She saw a version of home that didn't apologize for being simple, safe, and human. Her team was young and stubborn in the best way. Architects, planners, social workers, and 2 former construction foremen who could spot a weak joist from across a lot. They met residents where they lived, church basements, school gyms, and the corner barber shop. They listened first. Then they drew. Then they built. The first project was Brookline Commons, a cluster of low-rise apartments with wide hallways, light-filled stairwells, and shared courtyards lined with benches under maple trees. The second was a women's shelter retrofit, converting an abandoned office building into a place where safety wasn't a locked door but a thoughtful plan. Sight lines, sound dampening, warm lighting, and rooms that didn't feel temporary. The third was a microloan makerspace tucked into a ground-floor community hub, where people could repair bikes, fix appliances, and learn trades beside neighbors who cheered them on. Lena stamped each set of plans the same way, with her initials and a small pencil sketch of a front step. She said it kept her honest. Spaces start at the threshold, she told her team. People either feel welcome or warned before they even cross the line. Reporters tried to revisit the old story. She kept interviews short, always redirecting the spotlight to the residents. "I'm here to build," she'd say, "not to relive." Richard visited sites quietly, no press in tow. He wore plain jackets instead of tailored suits and asked questions that surprised contractors. "What slows you down most? Who's not in this meeting that should be?" He signed checks quickly when delays were about fairness, not vanity. He moved meetings to community centers when people didn't have bus fare to reach downtown. And when a developer friend suggested a photo op with hard hats and clean boots, Richard smiled and said, "I've done enough pretending." In time, his life changed too. He settled his divorce, moved into a smaller apartment with a view of the river, and learned how to cook a simple pasta dish he could actually finish without burning. Months later, he married quietly, a civil ceremony with a few friends and no headlines. His new wife worked as a public interest attorney. She wore a blue dress, carried no bouquet, and laughed like someone who had never cared for rooms where laughter was currency. A few old acquaintances whispered that Richard had fallen from grace. He felt, for the first time in years, like he had finally found it. As for Evelyn, the world stopped revolving around her long before she noticed. She tried to relaunch herself, rebranding campaigns, interviews with carefully chosen magazines, posts with long captions about growth and healing. The likes came, but the silence afterward was louder. One morning, she published a public letter asking for forgiveness. It was polished, precise, and empty in the way statements become when written to save a name, not a soul. The response was a shrug. No follow-up segment. No tearful reunion. No invite back to the rooms that used to need her laughter. The city kept moving. The foundation kept building. One crisp October afternoon, Lena stood at a podium in a university lecture hall packed with students, faculty, and residents she'd worked alongside. Behind her was a slide showing before and after photos of Brookline Commons. The before was gray and guarded. The after was open and warm, with painted murals and kids weaving scooters around planters. She didn't lecture like a star. She spoke like a neighbor. "When I was a kid," she began, "I drew houses on brown paper grocery bags. I didn't know the word architecture yet. I only knew one simple question. How do you build a place where people can breathe?" She clicked to the next slide, a diagram of a hallway with light wells and seating alcoves. "The walls that divide us are not made of brick," she said. "They're built from arrogance, fear, and silence. But every wall can be redesigned." Pens scratched. Heads nodded. A student in the front row wiped away a tear. Lena didn't pause for effect. She never did. She just kept going. "We talk about budgets and codes, and we should. But dignity is a line item too. If a mother has to choose between leaving a child alone or missing a meeting because there's no childcare room on site, that's a design failure. If a teen in a wheelchair can't reach the community garden beds, that's a design failure. If a staff door tells workers they belong in the shadows, that's a design failure. The drawings are moral documents. After the talk, a small crowd gathered around her. A professor thanked her for making theory feel like a handshake. A grandmother hugged her and said the new benches saved her knees. A young man shyly held up a notebook filled with sketches and asked if she'd look at one. She did, pointing at a window and suggesting he widen it, for the sake of the morning. By evening, she was back on site at HAPPPENED Center, the Foundation's newest project. A community hub with a clinic, a food co-op, classrooms, and a gym that doubled as a storm shelter. The building was simple: clean lines, generous eaves, brick that would age nicely. The kind of place that didn't demand attention, it earned trust. Workers were installing the last of the exterior lights when Lena walked the perimeter with the superintendent. She ran her hand along the brick, nodded at the metalwork, and stopped at the entrance to look at the door swing. "Left hinge," she said. "Opens better toward the sidewalk flow." "On it," he said, already reaching for his pad. Kids from the neighborhood had gathered along the fence, watching. She waved them over and asked what they wanted for the opening day. "Music," one said. "Free snacks," another added. A little girl in a purple jacket asked if there would be a quiet room, for when my head gets too loud. Lena wrote it down. "Yes," she said. "There will." When the sun dropped, the building glowed, a warm, steady light, not a showy shine. It looked like a promise kept. Across the water, the Kingsley mansion sat on its hill, its windows dim. Once, its parties spilled music into the night. Now, its lights flickered on and off like an old habit trying to remember itself. The lawn was cut. The stone was clean. But the house felt like a stage after the play, the props still there, the audience gone, the story over. Lena stepped back from HAPPPENED's entrance to take it in whole. She didn't pose. She didn't think about cameras. She thought about her mother's hand on her shoulder over brown paper, about porches and ramps, about the professor who said design reveals what we believe about people. She thought about a torn uniform and a folded square of cloth on marble. She thought about how something cruel had turned into a doorway. Richard arrived without fanfare, carrying a box of small plaques. "Welcome. You belong here." He handed one to Lena. She held it for a second longer than necessary. "Looks good," he said, meaning the building but also the work, the season, the choices. "It's a start," she answered. They walked the main hall together, noting details the way two people do who now trust the other to see what matters. He told her about a request from a neighborhood elders group. She told him about a plan to add art made by local kids. He laughed softly when she insisted the vending machines sell fruit cups. "We'll make it pencil," he said, and she grinned at the old builder's phrase. Outside again, the streetlights clicked on one by one. A bus groaned past. The October air tasted clean. Lena turned toward the city. She wasn't thinking about revenge or victory. She was thinking about floor drains and door swings and the way a lobby invites a person to stay 5 minutes longer than they planned. She was thinking about redesigning walls none of us can see. Behind her, HAPPPENED stood ready. In the distance, the mansion's windows blinked once, then settled back into darkness. Wealth dimmed, dignity glowing brighter. Lena slipped the plaque into place by the door, wiped a thumbprint from the edge, and stepped back. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she said it, more to the night than to anyone beside her. The maid she tore apart built the blueprint that redefined everything. Power doesn't always sit in marble halls or behind designer gowns. Sometimes, it stands quietly in a torn uniform and changes the world without raising its voice. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that dignity can rebuild what cruelty destroys, then don't just scroll away. Subscribe now, and be here when the next story proves that justice, in the end, always builds stronger than hate.